Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and Coats Thread Company has put out a free follow-along quilt pattern, and it is paper pieced. And block 3 is what's coming up next. So we're going to continue to use the fabric from Free Spirits, the solids, and we're going to use the paper piecing thread from Coats. And use a Microtech needle at 8012. So block 3 is this block here. You'll be able to print out 4 pages, and that's going to give you everything that you need. The first thing you need to do is after it's been printed, you need to test that square to make sure it is a 1-inch square. Set up your printer so it's the actual size. I am going to continue using the paper piecing fabric because I love the way that it tears off and I love the way it sews. And in order for me to cut my fabric, the size that I'm going to need for this, I've taken and I've measured all of the colors that are going to remain the same. So all of the light purple, I'm going to measure the largest part in that pattern, and I'm going to make sure that I have my 1/4 inch on each side, and I'm going to add still a 1/2 inch. And whatever the largest one is I'm going to cut a long strip. Now when I get to the machine, I know that the pieces are going to be big enough. So in order to do this, you are going to need to cut these sections apart. I have my 3 pieces to make my 1 portion of the block. Now you can cut them all apart and do each section in a pile and then sew them all together, or you can work on 1 block at a time. And we need to start just with the numbers like we did before. 1, 2, 3, the sewing line between 1 and 2 is the line that we're going to start with, and we're going to continue. So you can do your fabric 2 ways. You can leave it in the long strip, or you can cut it approximately to that size. I like to just place it on top of the paper, take a peek, and I know I'm going to have enough, and I'll just cut that off, and that's going to be the piece that I will use. So this will be the wrong side of the fabric. This will be the right side of the fabric. This is going to be my first stitching line. So I'm going to need to pin the fabric down from the top, avoiding that stitching line. I take a piece of template plastic and I put it right along that first line that I'm going to stitch and fold the paper back along that piece of plastic. And I do like to use this add a 1/4 ruler. I will be able to put that right up against that. And because it has a lip, it stays. I can cut the extra fabric off, and I know I'm going to have enough seam allowance to go for the next piece. So I have this nice big piece that I know is more than enough for this area. But I want to test it, so I'm going to pin along that stitching line and pull the fabric back just as if it was going to be there. And I definitely have enough to cover that section. It is important when you have something that is long and thin going at an angle to give it a test. The last part on this section is that little peak at the top. And you're going to do the same thing. Fold over 1/4 inch and stitch it down. You will have 2 ends that want to fold down. And I just like to take a row of stitching and stitch that point down, not into the actual quilt square, but into the seam allowance. So you can see it's just in the seam allowance there and right in the top. Now I can take the pins out and trim it up right along the dotted lines, and it'll be ready when I get the rest of the pieces done. So one side of the block is done. The other side is going to be sewn the same way. Start with your 1, 2, and 3. When all the pieces have been stitched down, stitch right through that seam allowance to hold those corners down. The other side's done. Now we have the center section. So the hardest part is knowing if we have enough fabric to cover that section. Well, there is a way that you can mark your fabric to be on this side so that you know what you're doing. Get a pressing surface that has some cushion to it. You could even use a towel. And you need to get a tracing wheel and gently mark all of your sewing lines. So you're going to be able to see the marks on this side as well as this side. So when you go to lie down your fabric, you will know that you have enough. Now with both sides marked, we're able to finish the center section. Start with your 1, 2, 3, 4, and continue just like you've done for the other 2 pieces until the whole piece is filled. When you have a long, skinny triangle, it's going to seem very unusual when you piece it onto the back. If the triangle is going in this direction, your long fabric is going to go in this direction. That way, when it folds over, it's going to cover that section. Once you've tested one and you know it's going to fit, the rest you are going to be able to do in the same fashion, and then you're going to be able to bring them to the machine. You will often come to a seam where when you go to fold the paper back, the stitching is going to be into that next piece. It's very easy. Just pull it apart and you're going to be able to fold the paper down just like you would normally. That stitch is going to come very easily out of that paper. And that will give you a nice flat surface to cut that 1/4 inch. And when all the fabric pieces have been put on, make sure you stitch right in that seam allowance in those floppy corners. Now you can trim it off and you have the center section, which means you have all sections done. You would have noticed in some of the pieces that the cutting line does not come right to the point. It's rounded. Be sure to trim on that rounded line because it's going to make piecing it together a whole lot easier. Now we need to sew the 3 blocks together. When you match up the seams, that cut end is going to match together, and you're going to be able to follow along that solid line to stitch them together. And before you put on the next side, if you remove a little bit of the paper on the ends, you won't have that paper getting caught in the seam allowance. When the point paper has been taken off, take the seam and just fold it towards the smaller piece. Then you're going to be able to sew on the next side. Match up the edges and sew right along that line. I do find it easier if I start stitching at the top and sew down and off of the corner. And that seam is going to be pressed in the same direction as the other. So all the seams are going in the same direction for all the blocks. When the block is put together, all of the seams are going to be going in the same direction. Remove the tip of the paper again and sew the sections together, 2 and 2. When you go to sew the last seam, just make sure that those seams are going in the same direction. A beautiful star with some great points. The last is to remove the paper and give it a good press. So we have finished block 3, and it's this amazing big starburst, and it's got some great points. I'll put a link in the description if you want to follow along with the pattern. And as always, thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.